Beloved, today we stand beneath the shadow of the Most High, lifting our hearts in a prayer of covering, drawing strength from the cries of Psalm 35 and Psalm 109. These sacred songs are not the language of fear, but the language of faith under pressure. They are the breath of a soul surrounded yet unshaken, opposed yet upheld by heaven. In Psalm 35, the servant of God calls upon the Lord to contend with those who contend against him. It is a bold prayer, yet it rises from a heart that trusts divine justice more than personal revenge. When enemies whisper, when false accusations spread like wildfire, when unseen forces work against your peace, this psalm teaches us to stand still and let the Lord be our defender. We do not need to sharpen our own swords when the Almighty is our shield. We do not need to repay evil for evil when heaven fights on our behalf. And in Psalm 109, we encounter a deeper anguish, a cry from one betrayed and falsely accused. Yet even here, the prayer is surrendered into God's hands. It is not a prayer of hatred, but of holy appeal. It places every wound, every injustice, every slander before the throne of righteousness. It reminds us that when our name is misused, when our kindness is repaid with hostility, the Lord records truth faithfully. No tear falls unnoticed. No lie stands forever. Today, we pray not from panic, but from position. Our position is under divine covering. We ask the Lord to silence every tongue that rises unjustly, to scatter confusion from our path, and to guard our homes, our work, our calling. Let every hidden snare be exposed. Let every plot formed in darkness dissolve in the light of God's presence. But remember, beloved, the greatest defense is not merely against human opposition. It is against despair, bitterness, and fear. As we pray Psalm 35 and 109, we are also praying for clean hearts. We ask that we do not become what we resist. We ask that our spirits remain tender, our trust unbroken, our hope steadfast. The Lord who defended his servant then is the same Lord who watches over us today. He rises for the oppressed. He answers the cry of the humble. He stands at the right hand of the needy to save them from those who condemn their soul. So let this be your covering today. The Lord is your advocate. The Lord is your righteous judge. Rest in him, trust in him, and walk forward unafraid, for heaven itself stands guard over your life. Beloved, there are seasons in life when the battle comes uninvited. You did not seek conflict, yet conflict found you. You did not raise your hand against anyone, yet hands were raised against you. Words were spoken in secret rooms, accusations formed without your presence, and misunderstandings multiplied without your permission. It is in such an hour that the soul trembles, not always from fear of defeat, but from exhaustion of constant defense. And here, the Spirit teaches us the sacred discipline found in Psalm 35. To let God fight the battles you cannot win alone. There is something deeply humbling about admitting that some battles are beyond your strength. Our nature often urges us to respond quickly, to explain ourselves repeatedly, to prove our innocence, to defend our name with endless words. Yet the psalmist cries, "Contend, O Lord, with those who contend with me." This is not weakness, this is wisdom. It is the understanding that divine justice operates on a higher plane than human argument. When you step back in trust, you are not surrendering to defeat. You are stepping aside for divine intervention. The Lord does not require your panic to act. He does not need your anger to empower his hand. He is not stirred by chaos, nor intimidated by the number of your adversaries. When the psalmist calls upon God to take up shield and buckler, he is declaring that heaven possesses armor stronger than human strategy. What you cannot silence with explanation, God can silence with truth. What you cannot untangle through reasoning, God can unravel through providence. There are battles that are visible, where opposition stands plainly before you. And there are battles hidden beneath the surface, where motives are twisted and narratives reshaped in your absence. These unseen conflicts drain the spirit because you cannot confront what you cannot fully see. Yet the Lord sees. He sees the whisper before it becomes a rumor. He sees the scheme before it becomes a trap. He sees the intention before it becomes an action. And the one who sees in secret also defends in righteousness. To let God fight for you requires restraint. It requires the discipline of silence when you long to argue. It requires patience when you long for immediate vindication. It requires faith when evidence seems stacked against you. This restraint is not passivity. It is power under control. It is the quiet confidence that truth does not expire. It may be delayed, but it does not decay. It may be buried, but it does not die. The Lord himself is committed to bringing hidden things into the light. Often the hardest battle is not against external enemies, but against internal reactions. When you are misunderstood, the heart burns with the desire to correct the record. When you are falsely accused, the spirit aches for immediate justice. But Psalm 35 teaches us to redirect that fire upward, not outward. Instead of retaliating, we intercede. Instead of attacking, we appeal to heaven. Instead of becoming consumed with defense, we become grounded in prayer. There is a profound shift that occurs when you say, "Lord, you contend." You are acknowledging that your identity does not depend on public opinion. You are confessing that your worth is not determined by slander. You are entrusting your reputation to the one who formed you. In doing so, you free your soul from the exhausting labor of constant self-protection. You rest beneath divine covering. The psalmist speaks of those who repay good with evil. That wound cuts deeply. It is one thing to face opposition from strangers. It is another to face betrayal from those you once blessed. The heart can become hardened if not guarded carefully. Yet divine contention is not fueled by bitterness. God does not fight because you hate. He fights because he is just. His defense is rooted in righteousness, not revenge. When you allow God to fight your battles, you are also protected from becoming what wounded you. Retaliation has a way of reshaping the soul. The more you mirror hostility, the more you risk absorbing it. But when you release the battle to the Lord, your spirit remains clean. You refuse to let injustice rewrite your character. You refuse to let accusation distort your calling. You remain steady, not because the storm is absent, but because your anchor is secure. There are moments when heaven's defense appears delayed. The accusations continue. The pressure intensifies. You may wonder whether your prayer has been heard, but remember, divine timing is not indifferent timing. The Lord works beneath surfaces you cannot perceive. He aligns circumstances, exposes contradictions, and allows truth to mature until it speaks for itself. What feels like silence is often preparation. The imagery of shield and spear in Psalm 3:5 is not primitive aggression. It is poetic assurance. The shield represents protection. The spear represents decisive action. God both guards and acts. He prevents certain attacks from reaching you, and he actively addresses others that have already risen. Some dangers you never even know existed because they were intercepted before arrival. Some schemes dissolve before manifestation. This, too, is divine contention. It is natural to measure battles by visible outcomes. We want to see adversaries corrected, misunderstandings clarified, reputations restored publicly. Sometimes that happens in dramatic ways. Other times, the greater victory is internal. You are kept from despair. You are preserved from cynicism. You continue walking in integrity despite pressure. That quiet preservation is itself a triumph. Letting God fight for you does not mean ignoring wisdom. It does not mean refusing appropriate boundaries or wise counsel. Rather, it means your heart posture is surrendered. You act when necessary, but without vengeance. You speak when required, but without hostility. Your confidence rests not in your eloquence, but in God's sovereignty. You do what is righteous, and you entrust results to heaven. Consider how exhausting it is to carry every conflict personally. Every criticism feels catastrophic. Every misunderstanding feels permanent. But when you step into divine reliance, a holy detachment forms. Not apathy, but perspective. You recognize that not every accusation requires your response. Not every rumor deserves your energy. Some battles are distractions designed to drain you from your true assignment. The enemy of your peace often seeks to entangle you in endless defense. If you are constantly explaining yourself, you are rarely advancing your purpose. Divine contention frees you to remain focused. While God handles what is behind you, you move toward what is before you. Your calling is not paused because someone opposes you. In fact, opposition often confirms that your path carries significance. The psalmist does not deny his distress. He does not pretend strength he does not feel. He brings his complaint honestly before God. This honesty is crucial. Divine defense is not activated by denial, but by dependence. When you acknowledge your vulnerability, you open space for divine strength. When you confess your inability, you invite divine capability. There is also a sobering reality within this prayer. The Lord's justice is thorough. If someone persists in malice, God addresses it in ways far beyond what you could orchestrate. His justice is measured, righteous, and complete. You do not need to design consequences. You need only to remain faithful. The judge of all the earth does what is right. In times of conflict, it is tempting to gather allies solely for validation. Yet even the support of friends cannot replace divine advocacy. Human allies may falter. Divine defense does not. People may misunderstand portions of the story. God knows the whole. When you rely primarily on human backing, your stability fluctuates with their perception. When you rely on God, your stability rests on unchanging truth. Divine contention also teaches patience in restoration. Sometimes God restores your name in ways you never anticipated. A door opens unexpectedly. An opportunity arises that contradicts prior accusations. A former critic acknowledges your integrity. These moments are not coincidences. They are orchestrated affirmations. Yet even if public restoration never mirrors the depth of private pain, your vindication before God is sufficient. The Lord stands not only against your adversaries, but beside you in your vulnerability. He is described as standing at the right hand of the needy. This image is intimate. He is not distant, observing conflict from afar. He positions himself close, attentive, protective. When condemnation surrounds you, he stands nearer still. There is a profound peace that settles when you truly release a battle. It does not mean the conflict disappears overnight. It means the weight shifts. The anxiety lessens. The need to monitor every conversation fades. You wake with steadier breath. You trust that unseen hands are at work. That peace is evidence of surrendered warfare. You may ask, how do I know when I have truly allowed God to fight? The answer often reveals itself in your reactions. When you can hear criticism without immediate rage, when you can face misunderstanding without frantic explanation, when you can pray for those who oppose you without sarcasm, then you are walking in divine reliance. Your strength is no longer reactionary, it is rooted. The battles you cannot win alone are often those tied to perception and motive. You cannot control how others interpret your actions. You cannot force understanding, but you can control your integrity. You can guard your heart, and you can entrust perception to God. Over time, consistent character speaks louder than momentary slander. Beloved, divine contention is not about crushing enemies. It is about preserving purpose. It is about ensuring that opposition does not derail destiny. It is about guarding your soul from corrosion. It is about lifting your eyes from conflict to covenant. The same God who defended the psalmist continues to defend those who trust him. So when pressure rises, resist the urge to panic. When accusations circulate, resist the urge to retaliate. When injustice wounds, resist the urge to harden. Instead, lift your voice heavenward. Invite the Lord to contend. Ask him to take up shield and buckler. Ask him to stand at your right hand, and then rest. For the battles you cannot win alone were ever assigned for you to win alone. They were invitations to deeper trust. They were moments designed to reveal that your defense does not depend on your strength, but on his faithfulness. And the one who fights for you does not lose. Beloved, there are wounds that do not bleed outwardly yet ache with relentless intensity. They are the wounds of betrayal, the sting of slander, the quiet devastation of being misrepresented by those who once stood near. These wounds strike at the heart because they touch trust, and trust once fractured is not easily restored. It is in such sacred and painful spaces that we are invited into the deeper discipline revealed in Psalm 109. The holy surrender of every wound into God's righteous judgment. This surrender is not resignation. It is not weakness. It is not pretending that pain does not exist. Rather, it is the deliberate act of placing every injustice, every false word, every act of betrayal into hands that are infinitely more just than our own. When the psalmist cries out under the weight of accusation, he does not suppress his anguish. He articulates it before God. He pours out the grief, the confusion, the indignation, yet he directs it upward, not outward. There is something profoundly purifying about bringing your pain directly to God instead of broadcasting it in bitterness. Human instinct urges us to gather sympathy, to rehearse the offense repeatedly, to defend ourselves in every circle where our name might have been diminished. But sacred surrender chooses a different path. It says, Lord, you see this, you judge this. I will not let this poison my soul. It acknowledges that divine judgment is wiser, cleaner, and more complete than personal retaliation. Betrayal creates a particular kind of disorientation. You begin to question your discernment. You replay conversations in your mind, searching for missed signs. You wonder how kindness could be repaid with hostility. In Psalm 109, the pain of being repaid evil for good echoes deeply. It reminds us that even righteous living does not exempt us from misunderstanding. Integrity does not immunize us against accusation, but surrender anchors us when confusion tries to uproot us. When you choose sacred surrender, you resist the temptation to become your own judge and executioner. There is a subtle danger in carrying unresolved wounds. They slowly reshape your spirit. If not released, betrayal can harden into suspicion. Slander can ferment into resentment. Injustice can calcify into cynicism. Over time, you may find yourself expecting harm, anticipating betrayal, guarding your heart not with wisdom, but with fear. Sacred surrender interrupts this transformation. It keeps your heart tender before God. The psalmist does not deny his desire for justice. He names it. He asks God to address the wrong. But there is a crucial difference between asking God to judge and appointing yourself as judge. When you surrender judgment to the Lord, you step away from the corrosive weight of vengeance. You refuse to let your soul become consumed with rehearsing the offense. You entrust the matter to one who sees motives, contexts, and consequences with perfect clarity. One of the most exhausting burdens is the need to clear your name before everyone. When slander spreads, you feel compelled to correct every distortion. Yet even if you manage to address one circle, another may remain. Human effort cannot fully contain rumors once released, but divine righteousness has a way of exposing falsehood in time. Sacred surrender trusts that truth does not require frantic defense to survive. Truth, aligned with God, has endurance. There is a deep humility in saying, "Lord, you judge between me and them." It requires relinquishing the desire for immediate vindication. It requires accepting that some misunderstandings may linger longer than you prefer. It demands faith that God's timing is not indifference, but orchestration. The delay of justice is not the denial of justice. Heaven's calendar does not move at the speed of our wounded emotions. In surrender, you also allow God to examine your own heart. This is perhaps the most courageous aspect of the prayer. It is easy to focus solely on the wrongdoing of others. It is harder to invite God to search whether any bitterness has begun to grow within you. Sacred surrender does not mean pretending you are unaffected. It means asking God to cleanse what the offense tried to plant. It means choosing purity over pride. The temptation to retaliate often disguises itself as righteousness. You may tell yourself that you are simply defending truth. Yet beneath that justification, there may lurk a desire to see the offender embarrassed or diminished. Sacred surrender disentangles justice from ego. It says, "Lord, uphold what is right, but guard my heart from cruelty." It recognizes that even justified anger must bow before divine wisdom. When betrayal occurs, isolation can follow. You may withdraw, hesitant to trust again. You may limit vulnerability, fearing repetition of pain. But surrender reopens the possibility of trust, not because people are flawless, but because God is faithful. Your security no longer depends on the perfection of others. It rests in the constancy of God. You can love again, not recklessly, but courageously, because your ultimate protection is not human loyalty, but divine oversight. Slander wounds identity. It attempts to redefine you in the minds of others. It can distort how you are perceived, sometimes even affecting opportunities or relationships. Yet, sacred surrender reminds you that your truest identity is not held in public opinion, but in divine knowledge. God knows who you are beyond every accusation. He knows your intentions beyond every misrepresentation. He sees your integrity beyond every distortion. That knowledge stabilizes the soul. There is also a mysterious freedom that arises when you release the need for revenge. The energy once consumed by rehearsing wrongs becomes available for growth. Instead of strategizing retaliation, you cultivate resilience. Instead of replaying conversations, you deepen prayer. Instead of scanning for threats, you nurture peace. Sacred surrender reclaims your inner life from captivity to offense. The psalmist's prayer is intense because his pain is real. Sacred surrender does not minimize the severity of betrayal. It acknowledges that certain wounds cut deeply, yet it refuses to let depth of pain justify depth of hatred. The prayer moves upward, not outward. It entrusts justice to God while guarding the soul from corrosion. Injustice can tempt you to question God's fairness. You may wonder why he allowed the betrayal, why he did not intervene sooner, why fall. Say, words were permitted to circulate. Sacred surrender does not demand immediate answers. It trusts that divine wisdom operates within a broader story than the present chapter reveals. What you perceive as abandonment may be preparation. What you interpret as silence may be refinement. There are times when God's righteous judgment manifests through exposure. Hidden motives surface. Contradictions unravel. Patterns become evident. Other times, judgment unfolds quietly, shaping circumstances in ways unseen. Not every act of justice is public. Some are subtle realignments that preserve you from further harm. Sacred surrender rests even when you cannot trace the specifics of divine action. Forgiveness often intertwines with surrender, yet they are not identical. Forgiveness releases personal vengeance. Surrender entrusts justice to God. You may forgive while still asking God to address wrongdoing. You may release hatred while still desiring righteousness. Sacred surrender harmonizes mercy and justice without allowing either to eclipse the other. One of the most beautiful outcomes of surrender is the preservation of joy. When you carry unresolved wounds, joy diminishes. Laughter feels forced. Gratitude fades. But when you place the offense into God's hands, you create space for delight to return. You recognize that your life is larger than this betrayal. Your calling is deeper than this slander. Your future is not confined by this moment of injustice. Sacred surrender also cultivates compassion. Having known betrayal, you become more sensitive to the pain of others. Instead of becoming hardened, you become empathetic. Instead of projecting suspicion, you extend understanding. The very wound that threatened to shrink your heart becomes the soil where mercy grows. This transformation is evidence of divine work within you. There will be moments when memories resurface unexpectedly. A phrase reminds you of the accusation. A place recalls the betrayal. Sacred surrender is not a one-time event, but a continual practice. Each time the wound reopens, you return it to God. Each time resentment whispers, you reaffirm trust. Each time fear of repetition rises, you anchor again in divine faithfulness. You may never receive the apology you believe is owed. You may never witness the acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Sacred surrender accepts that closure does not always come from others. It comes from God. It comes from knowing you have placed the matter in righteous hands. It comes from choosing peace over perpetual conflict. Divine judgment is not reckless. It is measured, holy, precise. God addresses wrongdoing without compromising his own character. When you surrender to his judgment, you align yourself with his justice rather than your impulse. You trust that whatever he permits, corrects, or exposes will ultimately reflect his righteousness. In surrender, your focus shifts from the offender to the overseer. Your gaze lifts from human failure to divine sovereignty. This shift alters your emotional landscape. Anxiety loosens. Obsession fades. Your heart steadies because it is no longer circling the offense. It is centered on God. There is courage in refusing to let betrayal define your narrative. Sacred surrender declares that your story is not authored by those who wounded you. It is authored by God. The chapter of slander is not the final page. The season of injustice is not the ultimate summary. God continues writing beyond what others attempted to conclude. As you practice this surrender, you will discover a strengthening within, not the brittle strength of denial, but the supple strength of trust. You become less reactive, more reflective, less defensive, more discerning. The wound that once felt overwhelming becomes a testimony of resilience, not because it was insignificant, but because it was surrendered. Beloved, sacred surrender does not erase memory, but it removes mastery. The betrayal no longer controls your mood. The slander no longer dictates your worth. The injustice no longer shapes your identity. You have placed it where it belongs, before the righteous judge who neither overlooks evil nor abandons the wounded. And in that placement, your soul finds covering. Not a covering that denies reality, but one that protects your heart from corruption. Not a covering that suppresses justice, but one that entrusts it to divine wisdom. Under that covering, you breathe again. Under that covering, you heal. Under that covering, you walk forward unchained, knowing that every wound you surrendered rests safely in the hands of a just and faithful God.